The sun dipped low over the sprawling plains of West Texas, painting the sky in hues of amber and violet. Dust swirled lazily in the wake of a battered Jeep as it rolled into the gravel lot of the Rusty Spur, a weathered roadside bar nestled along a lonely stretch of Route 19. Behind the wheel was Marcus Kane, a 32-year-old Army veteran who'd just returned from his final tour in the Middle East. His broad shoulders were still clad in a faded olive-green jacket, the sleeves rolled up to reveal forearms etched with scars earned in service. His boots, polished but worn, crunched against the gravel as he stepped out, his dark eyes scanning the horizon with the quiet vigilance of a man who'd seen too much. The Rusty Spur wasn't much to look at, a squat, single-story building with peeling paint and a neon sign that buzzed intermittently, casting a faint glow over the lot. It was the kind of place where truckers, drifters, and locals converged, drawn by cheap beer and the promise of solitude. Marcus wasn't here for company. After months of desert heat and gunfire, he craved the simple comfort of a cold drink and a moment to breathe before heading home to his sister's ranch 50 miles south. He adjusted the cap on his head, pulled low over his brow, and pushed through the swinging doors. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of stale beer and fried onions. A scratched jukebox crooned a Merle Haggard tune, its melody weaving through the low hum of conversation. Marcus took in the scene, a grizzled bartender wiping down the counter, a trio of truckers hunched over a card game, and a cluster of locals nursing drinks at mismatched tables. He chose a spot near the back, a small table beneath a flickering bulb, where he could keep the room in his periphery. The bartender, a wiry man named Cal with a perpetual squint, slid a frosted bottle of root beer across the counter without a word. Marcus nodded his thanks and settled in, letting the cool glass soothe the tension in his hands. He was halfway through the bottle when the door banged open, shattering the bar's fragile peace. 5 men swaggered in, their presence loud and unapologetic. They wore leather vests adorned with faded patches, skulls, flames, and cryptic slogans, marking them as a biker crew. Their boots thudded against the floor, and their voices carried over the music, brash and abrasive. The leader, a hulking figure with a shaved head and a jagged scar across his cheek, scanned the room like a predator staking out territory. His name, Marcus would later learn, was Rex. The others followed his lead, their laughter sharp and edged with menace. Marcus kept his head down, sipping his drink. He'd seen men like this before, posturing, itching for a fight. He had no intention of giving them one. But as Rex's gaze swept the bar, it landed on Marcus and lingered. The biker's lip curled, and he muttered something to his crew. The group's laughter died down, replaced by a low, conspiratorial murmur. Marcus felt the shift, the way the air tightened like a coiled spring. He'd felt it in war zones, in the seconds before chaos erupted. He stayed still, his posture relaxed, but his senses sharpened. Rex broke away from the group and sauntered toward Marcus's table, his crew trailing behind like a pack of wolves. The bar's chatter faded as heads turned, sensing trouble brewing. Rex stopped a few feet away, planting his hands on his hips. "Well, look at this," he drawled, his voice dripping with mockery. "We got ourselves a soldier boy, huh? What's a guy like you doing in a place like this?" Marcus met his gaze, steady and unflinching. "Just passing through," he said, his tone even. "No trouble here." "No trouble?" Rex snorted, glancing back at his crew for approval. "See, that's funny, 'cause you don't look like no soldier to me. Where's your fancy gear? Your shiny medals? Bet you're just some punk playing dress-up." The bikers chuckled, egging him on. One of them, a wiry man with a patchy beard, piped up. "Yeah, probably bought that jacket at a thrift store. Ain't no way you've seen real action." Marcus's jaw tightened, but he kept his cool. "I've served," he said simply. 3 tours. That's all you need to know." 3 tours? Rex sneered, stepping closer. "Boy, you don't even look old enough to shave, let alone fight. What's your deal, some kinda mascot? They let you carry the water or something? The insult hung in the air, heavy and deliberate. Marcus felt the familiar sting, the kind that came not from the words but from the ignorance behind them. He'd faced it before, stateside and overseas, people who couldn't see past his skin to the man beneath. But he'd learned to let it roll off him, to save his strength for battles that mattered. He took a slow sip of his root beer, refusing to rise to the bait. Rex, sensing the lack of reaction, grew bolder. He leaned in, his breath sour with whiskey. Tell you what, soldier boy. Why don't you prove it? Show us something. Or maybe you're just scared, too soft to back up that uniform. The bar was silent now, every eye on the standoff. Cal gripped a rag behind the counter, his knuckles white. The truckers paused their game, cards forgotten. Marcus set his bottle down, his movements deliberate. I don't need to prove anything to you, he said, his voice low but firm. I'm here to drink, not to dance. Rex's face darkened, his pride pricked. You hear that, boys? He's too good for us. Thinks he can sit there all high and mighty. He straightened, cracking his knuckles. Maybe we ought to teach him some manners. The threat was clear, and the bikers closed in, their shadows stretching across the table. Marcus didn't flinch. He'd faced worse, IEDs, ambushes, nights where the stars were blotted out by smoke. This was nothing. But as Rex's hand twitched toward his belt, Marcus knew the night was about to take a turn he couldn't avoid. The tension in the rusty spur thickened as Rex loomed over Marcus, his crew fanning out to block any easy exit. The biker's hand hovered near his belt, where a worn knife sheath glinted under the bar's dim lights. Marcus tracked the movement without moving a muscle, his training kicking in, assess, anticipate, act only when necessary. He wasn't here to fight, but he wouldn't let himself be cornered either. You got a smart mouth for someone outnumbered, Rex growled, his scar twitching as he smirked. What's your plan, soldier boy? Gonna salute your way out of this? The bikers laughed again, but it was forced now, laced with unease. They'd expected Marcus to cower, to shrink under their bravado. Instead, he sat there, calm as a still lake, his dark eyes steady. It unnerved them, though they'd never admit it. One of them, a lanky man with a buzz cut, shifted his weight, glancing at Rex as if waiting for a signal. Marcus leaned back slightly, his hands resting on the table. I don't want a fight, he said, his voice cutting through the noise. But if you push me, I'll finish it. Your call. The words landed like a challenge, quiet but unyielding. Rex's smirk faltered for a split second, replaced by a flicker of doubt. He recovered quickly, stepping closer until his shadow swallowed Marcus's table. Big talk, he spat. Let's see if you can back it up. Before he could move, the bar door creaked open again. A new figure stepped inside, a woman, tall and wiry, with silver-streaked hair pulled into a tight braid. She wore a faded denim jacket and carried herself with the kind of quiet authority that made the room pause. Her name was Lena, a former Marine who'd settled in the area after her discharge. She wasn't a regular at the Rusty Spur, but she'd stopped by tonight on a whim, drawn by the pull of a familiar haunt. Lena's sharp eyes took in the scene, Marcus cornered, the bikers circling, the bar holding its breath. She'd seen this playbook before, bullies flexing their muscle, banking on fear. She didn't know Marcus, but she recognized the jacket, the posture, the way he held himself under pressure. Soldier, she thought. Real deal. Problem here? Lena's voice rang out, steady and clipped, cutting through the tension like a blade. She crossed the room in long strides, stopping just outside the biker's circle. Rex turned, irritation flashing across his face. Stay out of this, lady. Ain't your business. Lena tilted her head, unfazed. Looks like it might be. 5 on 1. That's not a fight, that's a tantrum. Why don't you boys pick on someone your own size? The bikers bristled, but Lena's presence threw them off. She wasn't intimidated, and her calm rattled their momentum. Marcus seized the moment, standing slowly to his full height. At 6'2", he wasn't small, and the quiet power in his frame became impossible to ignore. Like I said, he repeated, I'm not here for trouble. Walk away. Rex hesitated, caught between Lena's interruption and Marcus's resolve. His crew shifted uneasily, sensing the tide turning. But pride was a stubborn thing. You think you're tough, 'cause you got a cheerleader now? Rex sneered, jabbing a finger at Lena. This ain't over. He lunged, aiming a wild swing at Marcus's jaw. The soldier moved like water, smooth and precise, ducking the blow and catching Rex's arm mid-arc. With a twist, he redirected the biker's momentum, sending him crashing into a nearby chair. The crack of wood splintering echoed through the bar, followed by a collective gasp from the onlookers. Rex hit the floor hard, grunting as he scrambled to his feet. His crew surged forward, but Lena stepped in, blocking their path. Think twice, she warned, her voice low and lethal. You're not the only ones who've seen a fight. The standoff stretched taut, the air crackling with unspoken threats. Cal, the bartender, finally broke his silence. That's enough, he barked, slamming a baseball bat onto the counter. Take it outside or I'm calling the sheriff. Your choice. Rex glared at Marcus, then Lena, his chest heaving. This ain't done, he muttered, brushing past his crew toward the door. The bikers followed, casting dark looks over their shoulders as they stormed out into the night. The bar exhaled, the tension easing like a storm passing. Lena turned to Marcus, sizing him up. You okay? He nodded, brushing a speck of dust off his sleeve. Yeah. Thanks for the assist. Didn't look like you needed it, she said with a faint smile. Where'd you serve? Middle East. 3 tours. You? Iraq. 2. She extended a hand. Lena. Marcus. They shook, a silent understanding passing between them. 2 soldiers, strangers until now, bound by something deeper than words. Outside, the roar of motorcycle engines revved to life, then faded into the distance. But Marcus knew this wasn't the end. Men like Rex didn't let go of a grudge that easily. He glanced at Lena, who seemed to read his mind. They'll be back, she said. Question is, what's your next move? Marcus didn't answer right away. He wasn't sure yet. But as he finished his root beer, a plan began to form, one that would turn the tables in a way no one, not even Rex, could predict. The next evening, Marcus returned to the Rusty Spur. The bar was quieter tonight, the usual crowd thinned by the previous night's drama. Cal nodded as Marcus entered, a flicker of respect in his squint. Lena was there too, perched at the counter with a coffee mug, her eyes tracking Marcus as he crossed the room. Thought you'd skip town after last night, she said, raising an eyebrow. Not my style, Marcus replied, sliding into a seat across from her. Besides, I've got unfinished business. She studied him, intrigued. You're not planning to take them on alone, are you? Not exactly. Marcus leaned forward, his voice low. I've dealt with worse than a few loudmouths. But I'm not here to prove a point with fists. There's a better way. Lena tilted her head, waiting. Marcus continued, men like that, Rex and his crew, they thrive on fear, on division. I've seen it overseas, in villages torn apart by hate. But I've also seen what happens when people stand together. That's what I want to do here. A unity play? Lena's lips quirked. Bold. Risky, too. Maybe. But I've got a hunch it'll work. Over the next hour, Marcus laid out his idea. He'd noticed the bar's mix of patrons, truckers, locals, drifters, all keeping to themselves, divided by invisible lines. He'd also caught the way some had watched him last night, not with hostility but with curiosity, even admiration. If he could rally them, turn the Rusty Spur into a place where differences didn't divide, it might just throw Rex off his game. Not a fight, but a stand. Lena agreed to help, her marine instincts kicking in. They spent the evening talking to patrons, starting with Cal. The bartender was skeptical but intrigued, especially when Marcus offered to cover a round of drinks to get things rolling. By night's end, they'd planted the seeds, a gathering, informal but deliberate, set for the next evening. Word spread quietly, bring a story, a song, something to share. No preaching, just presence. The following night, the Rusty Spur hummed with an energy it hadn't seen in years. Truckers swapped tales of the road, locals sang off-key ballads, and a few drifters even cracked smiles. Marcus and Lena moved through the crowd, listening, encouraging. It wasn't perfect, there were still wary glances, old grudges, but it was a start. Then the door slammed open. Rex and his crew stormed in, their faces twisted with fury. The room stilled, the fragile harmony teetering. Rex's eyes locked on Marcus, his voice a snarl. "You think you can turn this place into your little clubhouse? We're gonna burn it down." Marcus stood, calm as ever. "You're welcome to join us," he said, gesturing to the crowd. "Or you can leave. Your choice." Rex laughed, a harsh, grating sound. "You're done, soldier boy." He signaled his crew, and they advanced, fists clenched. The bikers moved like a wave, intent on chaos. But before they could reach Marcus, the room shifted. Cal stepped forward, bat in hand. A burly trucker named Jed rose from his table, cracking his knuckles. A local woman, Maria, stood too, her voice sharp as she told Rex to back off. One by one, the bar's patrons, people who'd barely spoken to each other days ago, formed a loose wall between Marcus and the bikers. Rex froze, his bravado cracking. "What the hell is this?" he barked. "This is us," Marcus said, stepping forward. "You wanted a fight, but we're not giving you one. We're standing together. You can join us, or you can walk away." The bikers hesitated, thrown by the unexpected unity. Lena crossed her arms, her stare daring them to test it. For a long moment, no one moved. Then Rex's wiry sidekick muttered, "This ain't worth it," and backed toward the door. The others followed, uncertainty replacing their swagger. Rex lingered, his pride warring with reality. Finally, he spat on the floor and stormed out, the roar of his bike fading into the night. The bar erupted in cheers, a raw, triumphant sound. Marcus didn't join in. He met Lena's gaze, a quiet nod passing between them. Over the next weeks, the Rusty Spur changed. The gathering became a tradition, a place where stories bridged gaps. Rex never returned, but rumors spread, of a soldier who didn't fight with fists but with something stronger. Marcus left for his sister's ranch soon after, his mission complete. He'd stunned everyone, not with violence, but with a choice, to build instead of break.